030, flying to Air Devil, runway 24, clear for takeoff.
Roger, Delta 252. Turn right heading 090, climb and maintain 4,000 feet. Clear for takeoff.
Breeze 135, Aviation 16. Port side high, I'm coming down hard.
Roger. 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Alex, Lovey, Howell. Lovey. Call sign. Where does it come from? How'd you get it? Where did it originate from? This whole, we know it as the Top Gun. Nobody knew anything till 1986 when Top Gun came out. So where do you get these call signs? How did they happen? Do you have any control over it? What's the story?
You don't have any control, and like all good things, they come from your squadron mates.
Okay. Your 20-year-old punks.
It's all they're anywhere from, 20 to, 27, depending on when they came in the Navy. Yeah, so for my call sign was Thurston. Goes back to Gilligan's Island.
Okay.
From some instructor called me Thurston, just made the correlation with the, with the comedy Gilligan's Island, and that stayed that way. And I went through all of primary T-34s, all of T-2s, A-4s, went all the way through the F-18 RAG. That's where you go fly the F-18 and learn how to fly. And it wasn't until I left that squadron and I got assigned to a fleet squadron that I showed up at my fleet squadron, and on day one, they're like, yeah, Thurston's way too masculine. So on the jet, they had already painted Lovey.
No, they didn't.
Yeah. So, and of course, they tell you in the Navy, you don't want, as long as you don't resist it, you'll be fine. If you resist it, it sticks. And so, I didn't resist it. It stuck, and the whole Navy knows me as Lovey. So there's no turning back. If I say Thurston, no one's going to recognize me. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
But, I heard that there was a head football coach for the Chicago Bears, Lovey Smith. He spells it a little differently, so that's where I kind of regained my masculinity. So.
That's hilarious.
Besides flying fighters.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so.
I love that, though. It's funny, though, because, like, my 30-year-old son, we were just talking to him on the phone. Gilligan's Island, kind of heard of it. But you and I, being the same age,
yeah,
that's like what I watched every day after school.
Right.
Every day after school. I know everything. And so Lovey, Thurston Howell III, was a huge part of our lives, which is really funny.
Oh, yeah.
Because you wouldn't get that today.
Right.
You were 20-something.
No. Yeah, it'd be something else.
That's awesome. I love that. So where did they originate, though? Like, where did this call sign stuff, is it World War II? Is it Vietnam? Like, where? And it seems like fighter guys are the ones that do it more so than other guys.
It was used, I think as more like on the, I think a lot of in the fighter community. And what's really unique about a ready room is that they're all your closest friends, and there's number one, there's no secrets there. And if they smell a weakness, they're like vultures. So whatever it is, so. But what it does over time is it makes you tougher. We use call signs. I really don't know the history behind call signs, but the way they come about is you either do something infamous or something memorable while you're flying, or maybe on Liberty, or your last name, has some kind of a connotation, so the call sign goes well with that, and those names kind of stick. And then you don't use people's first name. In fact, sometimes you got to take a double take, like, what's his first name again? Because you're always calling each other by our call signs.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I really don't know where they originated from, but they're very, very frequent and very used in the Navy. In the Air Force, I think it's more of an afterthought, but I think for us, it was just a way of life, and we didn't know any different. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's cool.
Even today at Delta, the Navy, my Navy friends, we call it. It's not normal for me to call somebody by their first name if we had a relationship in the service. You just go to that, unless we're in company and we're trying to be polite, then we'll do that. But the natural go-to is just a call sign.
That's wild. I love it. I love it. All right, so I want to jump into some rapid fire questions. There's about 15 of them. If you need to say more, but if you can just give me what they are, we'll come back to a few questions later.
Sure.
Total flight time.
Just under 20,000 hours.
Okay. Pilot ratings and type ratings that you have.
All the civilian ratings, through CFI, IMEI, seaplane. As far as type ratings, besides the fighters in the Navy, F-18 and so forth, and all the training planes, I'd say most of them are at Delta. I didn't really have any type ratings outside the military before Delta. So it'd be the L-1011, the MD-88, 73, 75, 76. They're, as you know, they're one type rating. And then we've got the 320, 330, and 350.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a nice little, and were you an engineer on the L-1011?
I was. I never got a chance to fly it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is that what you started on?
Yeah, that was as a
Okay.
new hire. We're like in
Nice.
the second or third class that started.
First airport you soloed from?
So that would be down in Palm Beach, just south of PBI, west Palm Beach County Air Park. The locals call it Lantana. LNA is the identifier.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, my grandma lived in Lantana.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
yeah, right there.
Yep, yep. The hardest airplane you've ever flown? Hardest to fly?
I think the most finicky when you're learning it, when you're early on in it, would probably be the Pitt Special because of the short landing wheelbase. I had one of those. I had a few of them. So that was the one. I had plenty of tail dragger time, but the A model, the first model I flew, the wheelbase was pretty narrow, and a lot of tail draggers you 2-point landed, but the prop clearance on these was pretty small. So starting out, you always 3-pointed it, and you come in pretty fast. So that was an adjustment to get that feel done. And then, of course, like in that tail dragger, you don't see going down the runway, so you're kind of landing off the side. So that's an adjustment. So I think the first 10 hours in that was, a pretty steep learning curve. But I had a great instructor.
I'm getting off track here just a bit, but it made me think, did you fly the pits knowing you were going into the military for aerobatic training prior to going in?
I flew it. I started flying it just out of high school with the desire to go into the Navy, knowing that it could potentially be beneficial.
Nice.
So, and then I got really involved in aerobatics, and it certainly was beneficial.
I can only imagine.
It was, but I didn't really know the full context of it at the time. It's a little different, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. So and I got to go down when it was my dad's airplane. It wasn't mine to begin with, and we bought it down at Pompano Air Center. And at the time in the 80s, that was the center of the universe for aerobatics. So Patty Wagstaff, Clint McHenry, Randy Gagne, he was actually my instructor, and a bunch of other aerobatic and airshow pilots were down there. And so when you bought an airplane, just by happenstance, you had access, and Randy at the time was my instructor. So you bought 10 hours just with them. And most of it was learn how to land the airplane, and most of it was spin training, upright and inverted spin training, because that's where you could potentially find yourself if you botch a maneuver. So you want to make sure you can recover. And then they would teach you the basic maneuvers. And then I went on, spent some more time with him just to learn a little bit more. That's probably the first time I really learned everything that we learn in our private. You really review it, because when you botch the maneuvers or the control inputs you put in are to counter torque, P factor, to do a hammerhead and all. And they walk you through all of those effects and gyroscopic precession. And they master that in order to do the
shows and
the
stuff.
shows that they do to that level of precision. Yeah.
And that really helped you out when you did aerobatics.
It helped me out. It helped me out
in
with
the Navy.
confidence. Yeah.
Because you'd seen it. You've been upside down.
I had absolutely no
nothing.
problem.
Wow.
Yeah. I really wanted to. I was flying quite a bit in high school. My dad had a cargo company. So, and as long as I kept my grades up and I worked hard, then I had the privilege of flying. But all of his pilots actually knew what they were doing. They were World War II veterans. Most of them were mechanics. We had a fleet of 6 Beech 18s. And most of them were World War II mechanics that worked on these airplanes. And then after they became pilots, by now, in the 80s, these guys are in their 60s, and they're the guys that are, that are really flying for my dad, and I'm just learning from them and trying to build time.
So they're flying the airplanes and working on them.
Correct.
They literally had a plane assigned to them, probably.
Yeah,
and worked on
they
them.
were all AMPs, and some of them
Wow.
were actually AIs, inspector IAs. Yeah, they did all the
What
work.
A good deal.
For
a
me, it was
company.
great. They were great mentors and stuff. So
So by the time you headed off to college, how much flight time did you have?
I had all my ratings, all my instructor ratings, and I probably had under 500 hours, between 400 and 500 hours. But I was flying
Is a lot of time, though.
I was flying a lot. I was flying as much as I could. I was flying skydivers on the weekend. When I went to UF and when I wasn't in class, I had students on the side, and then we had cargo runs that my dad would do that I'd get to do. He had contracts with different hotels out, and we would fly the perishables out to the islands. And then some of those islands were essentially fish weigh stations where the fishermen would package their fish, and then we'd fly it back to customs in Palm Beach. So we'd fly a load both ways, and then the distributors, after they cleared customs, would take the fish back to the
Wow.
fish houses and then put them in.
You had a mini FedEx going.
It was great. I didn't know how good. I knew I had it really good, but getting to fly with those guys and just getting to do that at that age. I didn't want to do anything else. So
And the stories you must have heard from World War II guys were probably crazy.
yeah, we just crazy stuff, and it was in those airplanes,
That's neat.
yeah, it was a privilege. I never even to this day I don't take that for granted.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, easiest airplane to fly.
I'd say probably to fly. I'd say it's probably the Airbuses,
Yeah, that's great.
only because they auto trim. And
I got you. Hardest aircraft systems to learn.
I think it was the first airline, the L1011, because it was the first systems of that nature that I had to learn in this context in the 121 world. And then I was going to be a flight engineer, like, what's that? What do they do? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Besides pour coffee for the captain and the FO, so it was a big learning curve for me just to learn all that, but it was awesome, and it turned out to be, we were flying with guys at the time that were hired, in the 60s.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool to hear them and actually work for them and see the operation for a year, as a kind of an engineer. Yeah.
That's something that the guys today don't get the privilege. It was a privilege to be able to
It was.
sit there and take it in and learn the airline system and kind of see what to do, what not to do, and not be in the hot seat per se.
Mm-hmm.
You could really just observe. That was neat. Scariest moment in an airplane.
I've had a few. Not I shouldn't say that. Nah. I think one time that comes to mind is because I was young. We were picking up a Beech 18 in St. Louis, and it was night. We didn't fly them too much at night. Most of the loads we'd fly are during the day, but it's at night. We're leaving St. Louis, and we're going to take the airplane back to West Palm, but we're going to stop in Tallahassee for the night. And it's pitch black out, and it turns out this airplane, we just had airplanes that had big wing tanks, And this is a model, and I remember my dad saying, it's got a nose tank, and, we got to burn out of the nose tank first. So, so we put both engines on the nose tank, and you know where this is going. So we're just flying out there, and the mechanic, he's over there, and I'm in the left seat. He's in the right seat. He's really the guy that's in charge. He's reading his newspaper, trying to figure out where we're at on charts. We had charts back then. And both engines quit. And charts go flying everywhere. There's all sorts of, adjectives that are shared. But in about 3 seconds, we figure it out. And we take the tanks, and put them on each wing, but we left the throttles up, So then one engine, why? So it was a crazy, maybe, 5 seconds. But that's a memorable time.
That's great. One aviation moment, this might parlay, you'll never forget. Just something in your mind that you'll never forget it.
So we were out in Fallon with one of my good friends who's actually an SVP of a major airline. He's actually the safety officer there. We were finishing an exercise and just trying to get away from the threat. We're trying to go as fast as we can. And this is not me blaming him. I think he was leading, so I was just following him.
F-18s?
Yeah, F-18s, Adam Fallon. We're on one of the ranges. And we're just getting outside of the range. And we're just going as fast as the airplane would go. And we're kind of in a nosedive. And it's the big Battle of Britain going on. And then we look up, you know, we're over Mach 1. And we're pretty low altitude. And we're just going like right down, you know, what looked like a couple little shanty towns. And then when we... Now he had a big position at the time at the weapons school there. He was the training officer. He's a really sharp pilot, really good guy. And it just turned out that we went down Main Street and we just blew out a bunch of windows just because of how fast we were going, you know. And we had no idea, you know, until we landed, and then we found out. So it's a memorable moment because here we are now. That happened in the 90s, and here we are 2026, and we can still laugh about that moment.
I love it. I love it.
So
I love
every
that.
time we see each other,
You think about that?
yeah.
You go back-
And there's been so many other stories, but that just brings us back
love it.
together. You know,
I love it, man. And maybe this next one, dumbest thing you've ever done flying.
That was pretty dumb. That was a lack of SA. You know,
I love it though. Closest you've come to death in an aircraft.
I think one of the moments that's the more memorable that got my attention is we were coming back from Fallon, and all the instructors typically have the airplanes, occasionally have a student, and then some of the rest of the crew just hop on a C9 and go back to this thing. And this time they were going back to Cecil. And we had the glorious idea that we were going to stop in San Antonio and go to the Auger Inn, which is there at Randolph. So we're all kind of going in at different times. They were all pretty much getting in at the same time. So I remember asking my buddy, hey, how's the weather? Oh, it's beautiful. That's great, you know. And so we just kind of powered up and, you know, burn a little more gas than we should, but, you know, the weather's nice. And we get there and this walks off, you know. And I remember now we're setting up for it. In the Navy, we didn't have ILSs at the time. So it's all ground controlled approach. And the Air Force doesn't do a lot of those. So long story short, we're coming in and the controller is doing the best job he could. And I'm by myself, and we get down there, and I get down there, and there's no runway. There's not a lot of gas left, you know? And so we ended up coming around. I said, wow, this is going to read real poorly. I'm going to have to bail out of a jet, you know, over San Antonio, Texas, because we ran out of gas. Well, long story short, we came back in, we landed, and I just remember landing, and I definitely reviewed that flight in great detail.
Wow.
Yeah, that was so I wouldn't say that was close to death, but that was one of those moments where you were definitely a little more alert.
Yeah. How about a dream airplane to fly that you haven't flown?
I'm in a different phase now, you know, but in adventure aviation. I think for me right now, we've flown a lot of jets. We've flown every fighter I really want to fly. It'd be kind of cool to fly the F-22, I think. But I think right now I'm more into adventure. And so for us, doing mountain flying, we're contemplating buying a mall.
Oh, cool.
We live on a lake, so doing all the seaplane flying that we like to do, but then also being able to go out and do some of the backcountry stuff.
Nice.
That's kind of the current aviation dream.
Biggest aviation regret?
Man, I have no regrets. I
Love
can
it.
honestly say that. Yeah.
Pilot watch of choice?
I'd probably say the Rolex.
GMT2?
Mine's a Submariner because
Okay.
we're divers, you know,
I gotcha.
so it kind of covers both.
Makes sense.
but,
You're a water guy. Best pilot you ever flew with?
Oh, wow. I've been fortunate. I've flown with a lot of great guys. You know, different settings are different. You know, in the airline setting, it's just guys you admire on how they conduct themselves. It's not necessarily how they fly, but how they comport themselves in the cockpit. Maybe a little bit of a tone of humility. The guys that stand out are the guys that don't talk about themselves the entire 14-hour trip over to Tokyo. Maybe they want to learn something about other people around them. Those are the guys that stand out.
Gotcha. All right. The very first job you ever had non-flying, and how much did you get paid?
Most of my jobs before flying all involved commercial fishing, first mate on sport fishing boats, dive boats, and oftentimes didn't get paid anything. But tips was the big thing.
So you're like 14, 15, 16 years old type thing?
Freshman, and you're working for tips, and then you graduate, to $150 for a half-day charter with tips.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, man. We'll get back in a little bit more in depth on I got a couple questions later, but let's talk about the early aviation routes. So when would you say you were first bit by that aviation bug? How old were you, and what's the story on how you got started in aviation?
I was always around it, flying with my dad. As early as I can remember, they had a car seat in between him and my mom. They used to own a Mooney when I was like 1. So I grew up watching my dad fly. And that's all I ever thought of was airplanes. So 3.
So you knew when you could talk, I want to be a pilot.
Yeah, and then as I got a little bit older, 5 or 6, my dad was out of the service. He was flying on contracts. And when he could bring me, I'd go with him. And so there were times when we were in these old beat up DC-3s, him and his co-pilot, me sleeping on the cockpit floor with a cargo bay full of cargo, all the way from, later on. I mean, so those were the early memories, and I knew that's what I wanted to do.
And it wasn't, it was
never
just
was a
something that
question.
you got bit by the bug. I want to do it. It wasn't so I can impress my dad, or it's just,
an
I
adventure.
want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was this chasm, when you were on an airplane, when you were going somewhere, it was an adventure. You were around guys that kind of you aspired to become.
Yeah.
And it was just,
That's awesome.
there was that, and honestly, like absolutely nothing else.
That's awesome. So before the Navy, so all your civilian flying, that 500 hours that you described prior to college, and then you did college, and then you went into OCS.
Mm-hmm.
During college, did you do any flying? During that 4-year time?
Yeah, I did.
What'd that look like?
Well, it was all flight instructing. It was all flying some cargo, skydivers on the weekend, every weekend. And then I was skydiving myself too in between loads. That's all I did with my spare time when I wasn't. That's it. I mean,
Academics and flying.
Yeah. And academics were really a means to an end.
Sure.
Because, to go fly in the Navy, you had to have a college degree. I wasn't. And so they asked me, what do you want to study? Well, we'll study aerospace engineering because it has to do with airplanes. I mean, everything was around aviation. And,
Right.
I wanted to go in the Navy, you know what I'm saying? But I was, if that didn't work out, I was equally, I was going to go fly Lear. I had a job lined up flying for a medevac, flying Lear at the time, Lear 24s and Lear 25s.
Nice.
If the Navy didn't work out, and so it was always the adventure was flying, and I would just pick my first choice, just go down that road.
So when you graduated college and OCS started right after college, how much flight time did you have at that time?
Well, I didn't graduate college. So the Navy had this I was in ROTC my freshman year, and the Navy had this program that they opened up at the tail end of the Reagan-Bush era.
Okay.
And I only learned through it because my dad, my roommate at the time, was taking a little bit longer to get through college. He was a lot smarter than me, but he was like in his 6th or 7th year. And he'd only accomplished like a year and a half of school. So my dad, took him in as one of his kids. And in the AOPA magazine of that month, they were talking about this program. And it's a program that they resurrected from World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and it always popped up when there was a shortage of pilots.
Okay.
When Academy, ROTC, and the regular 4-year pipeline didn't produce enough, they created the Naval Aviation Cadet Program.
Okay.
So the way you qualified for that is you had to finish your sophomore year of school. You had to have 60 hours at a 4-year institution. You had to be single. You had to be between 19 and 25. And then you just, you took all the entrance exams and everything. And then you went in. The only difference is you did not get commissioned at the end of AOCS.
Okay.
You got commissioned at the end of getting winged. So when you went to your winging ceremony, all your other friends were getting winged, but they were already officers. You get your wings with them, but you'd also get commissioned at that winging ceremony.
Okay.
So I was 19 because it was sophomore year. I wanted to do it as fast as I could. And I just happened to be at the right place, the right time. So because that option was available and I could go to flight school, April, May of 1989, I went instead of waiting until May, June of 91, which would have been a whole different trajectory. I didn't know it at the time.
Really?
Yeah. Because in 91, there was a big reduction in force. People were getting assigned to desks. People weren't going to flight school. Things
So
were
your
slowing
career
down.
would have looked completely
Look,
different.
100% different.
So you went to primary Navy flight school at 19,
Right after my sophomore year of college, just getting ready to turn 20.
and you go into a T-34.
You go into AOCS
Okay.
for 120 days.
Yep.
You become an officer. And at that time, you did all your aviation in-doc
Okay.
simultaneous. That's about 120 or so days. And literally, we graduated August 18th of 1989. And that was a Friday. And that Monday, I started primary. So back then, that's how fast things were going, which is fine because, idle hands is the, devil's playground for us. So we were just busy. So I packed up in Pensacola, went to Milton, which was pretty much just down the street, Whiting Field. And that's where I went to primary. Started right away. And that was like, full afterburner for 6 months. And then went down to Beeville, Texas. I finished on a Friday. I had the weekend to get down there and start on a Monday.
And so what did you
T2s.
fly in Beeville?
In Beeville, at the time, it was T2s and A4s. So intermediate was T2s. That's your first jet. A little bit of formation. You wrap it up by going out to the aircraft carrier for the first time. And then you transition across the field to another squadron. In this case, it was A4s. And there you do a little bit of instrument flying, a lot more formation flying. And that's where you got introduced to dropping bombs, air to ground, air to air. And then you wrap up your training going back out to the ship a second time to finish your carrier quals.
So when you went to the F-18 RAG, you're how old?
I was 21.
21.
Yeah.
21 years
I was
old.
just turning 21.
That's crazy. Absolutely.
So I wasn't legal enough to buy a beer, from AOCS to... So, we just drank O'Doul's.
Of course you did. I'm sure it existed back then, right?
Yeah. That's my story.
O'Doul's?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
Yeah.
So your civilian flying absolutely prepared you. I mean, you already mentioned you had so much flight time. You had aerobatic time. You grew up in airplanes. I mean, you were so prepared. Right?
I was super privileged. But I'd say even in flight school, with all that preparation and all that advantage, I still worked harder than most of my peers. You know what I'm saying? I just, it wasn't work. I'm not saying that braggadocious.
No, I understand.
It was a passion. And it's like, like when you get afforded a dream and you're there, because my whole life growing up, it's like, hey, you're never going to be able to be a Navy pilot. I mean, like, it's like 1 in a million, So I grew up with that, with that message, not from my dad. My dad's like, yeah, you can be anything you want to be. But the kind of the culture in the world is like, yeah, and they didn't mean it negatively. They're just like, hey, it's very
The reality. I want to be an NBA player.
Right.
Like, yeah, okay, that's a great thing to
Exactly.
say. So when you got there, you're like, I'm not messing this up.
Yeah,
When
and it
I'm
was-
given an opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm 20 and I'm flying fighters in the Navy, and the guys that I was flying with were amazing guys. Some of them went to Ivy League schools, and they were all mostly like big brothers, more than anything, because most of them were older than me.
That's cool. Very, very cool.
And some of them, work with us today, which is really cool.
That background that you had, you and I have talked in the past about your background and all the different places that you've lived in the world. And you're kind of not only chasing family, but your dad is flying contract stuff all over the world. And you're a part of that just by the function of, being a son to your mom and dad and living 2 different places and all the contracts that are there being flown by your dad. How would you say that shaped you in preparing you for that stage of now I'm on my own, now I'm in college? It sounds like you're a major go-getter, completely a go-getter. How did that form you to succeed, or did it have anything to do with your success? Did it give you that drive?
Well, no,
Living around the world?
My dad, one of the things, like he's amazing. He's no longer with us, but he was an amazing dad. He was definitely an encourager, And he stood by you, helped you the best he could from a time standpoint. You know, and as I was getting older, he was always there, especially when we moved back to the States. So he was there at every stage. So he was my dad, but he was everybody else's dad at the same time, because most of their dads were not as available as my dad was. So he modeled it, and then he got behind you. He expected you. You know, he had some famous lines. My dad's technique and tactic was he'd load on the responsibility. You know, one example would be we had some large fishing boats. And then when I was just barely capable of running the boat, still a first mate, you know, captain is sick or something and we got to go run it. He's like, hey, you got this. And then his famous line as you're leaving is, don't fuck it up, you know? And it put this tremendous pressure on you because you didn't want to let him down. You know what I'm saying? And you knew you can do this, but you got to focus, you know? And so he always put me in those positions. And so that gave me confidence, just little steps like that. He did the same thing for my sister in different arenas. And so he was your biggest cheerleader. So that was huge for me as a kid. And my friends would be like, that's amazing, you know, and I would see him encourage them. And so that really shaped how I wanted to be a dad. And it's really helped me be the dad that I'm able to be today, because it was modeled for me by him, you know. And, you know, you bring up a good point. When I mentor young kids, you know, we always want them to do well. We're always telling them, you know, where the bar is, good grades in school, you know, but sometimes I find that we all say that, but that's not really enough for young kids today. You know, like you need a why, you know what I'm saying? You need like a core passion focus that pulls all that stuff through. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, as a kid, I got in a lot of trouble. You know what I'm saying? I got in a lot of trouble. There were times where, you know, I thought I wasn't going to be able to go to flight school because I got in way too much trouble, you know. And I was just, you know, my dad's grace, God's grace reminded me that, this is unmerited favor. I didn't deserve to be here, you know. But what got me through when it was tough was just like the desire and the passion. So that's why I'm so adamant with kids. You got to really find what you love and really chase that before you strap on the monetary value to it. Figure out what you really love and then monetize it from there. Of course, if you love medicine and you want to be a surgeon, that's monetized. You just got, but there's some areas where it's not clearly defined. You know, aviation is clearly defined, and there's a structured path like there is in nursing and medicine where you follow this path. So I think that's helpful, is you get the structure and the passion, you put those two things together, and now it's just effort, you know. That might have been a little too long-winded, but that's what's
No,
that's
not long. I love it. I love that. I was going to ask you something and I forgot. Gosh. Oh, why? Okay. I'm just curious. So why did you get in so much trouble?
Stupid, you know, hanging around with the wrong people. And I got in trouble with the law. And my dad was out of town. You know, my best friend's aunt had to literally bail me out of jail, and she didn't have a lot of money. We still laugh about it to this day. You know, so when my dad came back in town, you know, he's like, it was stupid. It was just irresponsible and stuff. And I'd basically thrown away all my dreams. It's like, that's it, you're done. And my dad, you know, we asked for grace from several people and they extended it, you know, again, unmerited favor. And so I carry that with me today when I'm here today in front of you, you know, being where we work today, having been able to go in the Navy, having had all these opportunities. I feel like there's a stewardship that goes with it. And, you know, just being here and telling people, you know, I fly for this airline, it's just not enough. You know, it's not that it's not good enough. You know what I'm saying? It's that it's not the sole reason for existence.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
I love it. All right, moving on to the Navy. They say that 10 to 20% of your Navy life is flying. Is that an accurate number? And the rest is other stuff of the time you spend in the Navy?
Well, early on, going through flight school, you know, obviously it's 100%. Then going through the RAG, it's 100%. And when you're a junior officer, you do have collateral duties. And, you know, in a Navy squadron, if you look at like an F-18 squadron, you typically have, 12, 13 jets and maybe 17 pilots. And that's the officers. The single seat airplane, 17 officers. You might have a maintenance officer. That's a non-pilot. You might have an intel officer, maybe one or two warrant officers. You have like an orderly and a warrant officer that works in maintenance. But the entire rest of the squadron is enlisted. They all have their different specialties. And as a knucklehead JO, you show up and, what you care about is flying fighters. And the skipper says, because there's only 17 officers, it's not like a P3 squadron where you multiply that by 5 or 6. You have like 5 or 6 jobs. You're the AVARM division officer. You have 300 enlisted guys that work for you. You have all these other duties. You're the legal officer. You're a landing signals officer. So there's some jobs, that correlate to flying and are a lot of fun. And when they became available and they were open, I jumped on them. So I was lucky because when I joined my squadron, one of the collateral duties is landing signals officer, and that's grading landings. And of course, that's outside.
And for the audience, that's the guys that are on the side of the boat.
Yep.
They're in their little white coats. They're on
That's
they're on their speakers. You see the plane coming in. And what are they doing exactly? They're called landing signal officers, but the pilot's got the ship in front of them. These guys' instruments. Why do you need these guys there? Like, explain that.
Well, I mean, they're there for safety. That's their number one reason. And they're there to observe the landings. And every landing's graded.
Okay.
So every squadron has 2 landing signal officers. So in an air wing of, 6, 7 squadrons, you got, 15 or 16 or 18 guys that are LSOs. You have a duty rotation. So you always have an F-18 guy, an E-2 guy, an F-14 guy. We don't have F-14 guys anymore, but you have most of the aircraft types represented there. And then you have an air wing guy who works for the CAG, who's the head kahuna. He's the most seasoned LSO. And you're grading all the landings. And 3/4 of the time, guys are doing well. You're just observing. You're not having to say too much. But every once in a while, if a guy's scan breaks down or it's a rough deck, and you have to wave people off because they're out of sync with the deck or they're just having a bad day, you're there to basically make them aware of that.
So in a sense, you're an instructor on the ship watching the plane come in. And if he gets off for whatever, all the reasons you just mentioned, you're waving him off.
Sure.
Because you see this is not going to end well from your perspective.
Sure. Or the deck's foul, or the guy in front of him, he's not out of the safety area. And he might not necessarily know that.
I gotcha.
So
I gotcha.
That's another reason.
Okay. Yeah, because the old-fashioned LSOs on the World War II, with the paddles and so forth, and now today you see them the way you see them in the videos and so forth. So
they're doing the exact same thing. They're just doing it with hand signals.
I gotcha.
Yeah, we're doing it on the radio.
And so in the pilot's ear, you're talking to him all the way down.
Under normal operations, when you're not comm out, he'll call the ball. He'll acknowledge that. And that's typically at 3/4 of a mile behind the ship. And then you're watching his landing touchdown.
And that ball is guiding him in to tell him where he is laterally and vertically into landing spot.
And it's stabilized with the ship.
Okay.
Up to a certain sea state. And when that sea state gets excessive, then the ball doesn't work anymore. It doesn't keep up quickly, fast enough.
As the human being.
So then the LSOs will take over and they'll be the ball. And they'll tell the guy where he's at, high, low. So they're driving it. It's called moveless.
Okay. Yeah. And what kind of sea state are you talking?
It has to do, it's a pretty significant sea state. You're talking like, 10 foot.
So the ship's moving around a lot.
The ship's moving. The back of that. I mean, I have friends. We've landed on the ship sometimes where it's so rough that you'll see the props exposed.
As you're coming in your airplane, you're seeing ship props.
That's when you know it's a bad day. Now, that's very uncommon, but we've seen that in the North Atlantic on occasion.
That will never be a night landing, will it?
In this case, it wasn't, but it gets rough at night, and we do moveless at night when it's necessary. Like if there's a conflict going on,
you got to do.
You're going to launch the strike. You know what I'm saying? And so, and then you're going to come back, and if you can't get aboard the ship, then you're probably going to bingo to a lame destination. But that's not preferred, especially if you're not in the best part of the world. So
wow, that's crazy.
So there's a lot of pressure to get on the ship. I mean, you miss. There's tankers overhead to go get gas and try it again. I mean, there's a lot of effort that goes into getting you back on board the ship.
Sure. I mean, they want those airplanes back for the obvious reasons. What is the hardest part would you say of Navy training? When you think about starting and getting to your F-18 rag, let's say, what's the hardest part? Not necessarily for you, but in general, if you ask 10 Navy guys just made it to their squadron on the ship in their F-18, what was the hardest part getting through?
We were fortunate in the F-18. Most guys would tell you it's probably the ship, you know. And at the time I was flying in the air wing, you know, we had a really good avionics suite in the F-18. So so the F-18 was a more comfortable airplane to bring on board the aircraft carrier than, say, and I never flew the A6 or the F-14. I got a couple hours in the F-14, but you know, I didn't fly it on board the ship. So those guys would tell you it's definitely shipboard ops and getting used to that.
Okay.
100%. And it's different. That's just not something you do anywhere else but the Navy. And when you get into that environment, it's not just landing on the ship. You know, as you develop, there's a stack on top of the ship, and there's an art to sequencing all the airplanes. And it's no one during the day, no one's sequencing you in. There's a stack, you know, that goes up.
So you all are sequencing
yourselves, and you're just watching the guy.
Kidding.
Yeah, and
Really?
you're trying to get, you know, like a 45-second interval between every airplane, and you do that. You know, there's just certain techniques that you learn.
That is interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, that's probably, as you become a flight lead, that's probably, you know, the thing you pay the most attention to. Because why? Because that's where the most visibility is. So you botch that up, you'll hear from the air boss.
I got
You know, and if you don't hear from the air boss, he'll call. You have a rep in the tower, and you tell the rep it's going to go to your skipper. You'll hear from your skipper. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
So they take that interval real seriously. At least they did back then.
So that aspect of it is much harder than getting through the systems training or the individual primary to T2 to the A4. It's that aspect
The
of it.
shipboard ops is it. And then, you know, different people in different stages of training. I mean, that's at the end of training, it gets more dynamic. So guys, you know, you got to acclimate to the air-to-air stuff. And, you know, some guys gravitate to it real quickly. And then some guys just take a little bit longer to just, you know, get all the concepts down. But over time, you get those. There's always going to be guys that are, you know, more proficient than others in different areas. But it's just putting it all together. That's where you put it all together, you know.
When you go through primary training, you've already been selected for jets.
Not yet.
Not yet.
That's
so,
at the end of primary training.
So that's at the end. And then, so my question would be, you know, when do you meet the guys that you're going to know for your entire Navy career? Because this is the very foundation, the beginning part of, all right, we both made jets. We're going into the T2. We're going into the A4. We're going into the F-18. You become this, what it looks like to the outsider, extremely close buddies. And then it comes up to the point of someone has an accident. You know, the first time you lost a friend. Have you lost a friend in the Navy due to an accident?
Lost a few. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So at what stage did that happen? What's the story behind those things? You know, is it like in the civilian world, a lot of it's pilot error, some of it's mechanical, some of it is mechanical, but then there's a pilot error that you know proceeds after that. What's the story on some friends that you have lost? I mean, they're
both,
and they're young. My gosh,
yeah.
You're talking 20.
Yeah, 23, 24. So the first question is, when you finish primary and you go jets, you're likely to see a lot of those guys, you know, the rest of your life, because they're going to be in some kind of jet world. Even the Marines, you know, you still cross paths. They're instructors with us at the F-18 squadron.
Okay.
You know, so we do a lot of things together. They have their own mission, their own unit. By the time you get to A4s, you go to the F-18 rag. Now, you know, it's a narrower group of guys in a much smaller community. You're on a specific coast. So right there, you have an opportunity to be in their squadron, to be in a sister squadron, for them to come back, fly with them, maybe to see them out of Top Gun, you know, whatever. So now you're more likely to see those guys. And then when you get to your fleet squadron, now you're going to do life with those guys. That's your 3-year tour. And so those are your closest friends. And then you roll out of that squadron, go to another squadron. It's the same thing. you know. Back to the accident thing. I think for me, the first accident where I lost a friend was in A-Force. We were out at the ship, and the ship comes in town, so we stage. In this case, we went. We're in Beeville, which is just north of Corpus. So we're just going to go out to the ship. And the way they did it back then is you had a flight lead, and you had 3 students. So the flight lead went out there, found the ship, came in for the break, and then you'd break after him, and you'd get behind him on what we call the 180 in the civilian world. We call that downwind. And he'd tell you, I'm wide, I'm in close. And then you'd adjust your beam distance, and then you'd do your thing from there. And overhead, there was always like a scout plane. There was always like an airplane that was hovering overhead in case, a student needed something. He had the bingo, then they would chase him there and make sure everything was okay. So I think in this particular case, I was not out at the ship. We had come back. We're all coming back. We're all high-fiving. We're finishing our carrier calls. And, one of our friends didn't come back. And so we assumed that he bingoed. So long story short, there was an airplane. So there are airplanes in the pattern getting ready to land. And there was an airplane that had an issue. And the airplane that was up there scouting basically made a beeline for the troubled airplane, but cut in front of, in this case, my friend, and they had a midair.
No. Okay.
Yeah. And it was right overhead the ship. And so it was, obviously very visible, and nobody ejected. And then he passed away.
Gosh.
And we got word of that afternoon, so it's tragic. And literally, so you went from the highest high, and now your buddy passed away, and then you're going to his memorial service with his mom, his dad, his siblings, So yeah, that's tough. So that, I would say, the Navy would have said it was pilot error on the airplane. That was the recon airplane that was beelining for the student. That was an instructor, and that was actually the commanding officer of one of our squadrons.
Okay.
So we had a lot of experience. Obviously, just didn't see the airplane. And so that was tragic.
Jeez.
And then we had, like, later on, if you want an example of just, it's not your day, I had on cruise, we were in the Adriatic, and we had a friend, our sister squadron. So every time there's a launch or a recovery, you have LSOs, you got the air boss, and in the tower, each squadron is supposed to have a tower flower. He's up there to be the squadron's rep. If somebody has an issue, you've got all the manuals in front of him. It's kind of like OCC. It's it's kind of like, it's not quite like the dispatcher, but it's like the duty pilot, where it's like they call the lead and say, hey, I had to patch you into somebody while they're flying. And so as an LSO, you never get tower flower, generally speaking. And for some reason, the tower flower was sick, and my ex was like, you got to run up there. We don't have anybody. So I was behind. So I'm hauling ass. So the ready rooms are typically a deck or 2 below the flight deck, so we're down like on the 3rd level. So I'm working my way up. You got to go outside on the flight deck, get inside the island, climb up these crazy stairs to get upstairs. So as I pop outside the island, I see this massive splash, and everybody's looking over the side of the ship. And I said, what's that? And they're like, that's the pilot of 303 as a parachute die, and they're just going by the ship because the ship's doing about 30 knots. So what had happened is in our sister squadron, one of my close friends had shot off Cat 1. And at the time when we were flying in the Adriatic, it was mostly like a close air support mission. And so you're working with different ground controllers. And it was during the time, laser guided bombs and stuff. So we were carrying FLIRs on one of our cheek stations. And so we were flying with a center tank and a drop tank on the opposite wing, on the opposite side of the FLIR. So you had better visibility on the FLIR. And that's just how we did it that whole cruise. We called it double bubble ugly. And so he shot off, and he had a massive flight control fail. We didn't know this at the time. And the airplane just shot off and then just did a split S. And while he realized he wasn't in control of the airplane, he reached for the ejection handle, but the airplane was already, going into the water. So he ejected into the water. So that was tragic. So I'd say that wasn't, and that's tough because they go recover the body. It's all visible on the ship, right? they go get it, they put it, and if they drop it on the helicopter, they carry it in, and this is all happening within like 15, 20, 30 minutes, So then, and there's another memorial service on the ship and stuff. And that was a tough one because that was a real close friend of mine. And I feel like that's just one of those days where there's nothing he could have done. And we had it happen again to another friend on the opposite coast, another really close friend of mine at night. This was the first one I described was during the day, where the airplane just went straight nose down at night in the Pacific Ocean. Great guy, family man, Navy superstar, graduated from Notre Dame, just everybody's best friend, and great aviator. And he was just at the wrong place.
Just a mechanical failure.
Yeah, yeah.
Gosh.
Where the flight controls programmed full nose down, from what I was told. Yeah. So it was tragic, so yeah, that's just the reality. And I probably lost a half a dozen friends in airplane mishaps from starting primary until I got off active duty.
And that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. 2 of them were just radical, malfunctions of the airplane. 4 of them were probably, could have happened to anybody. Vertigo at night on NVG goggles, flying into the side of a mountain kind of thing. Yeah, it's tragic, Man.
It seems like the way you describe the relationship, me not being in the military, is like if you're on this 3-year tour with these guys, it's almost like me being in high school with my basketball player buddies, where you're all total buds all the time. You play, you fight, you do everything, and you go year to year through this process. Does it have that feel? I mean, here you are, like your teammates, and you're doing life together for 3 years.
For me, I was a wrestler in high school, and it's definitely a team sport, but you're on the mat by yourself. I played football for a couple years, but when I played when I was in the Navy, that was the closest thing to family in my experience, because you just do life with these guys. And, you're at that age where you're single, then you're married, start having kids. So you're doing a lot of phases. It just happens to be, where you're just doing a lot of things. Not to mention you're in a fighter squadron together, living out your dreams. So it's just this culmination of things, that just make it a real special time in your life. And those are the guys that you get to do it with, so it's just, and here I am 56, 30 years later, and it's like it was yesterday, so.
Does it, not to bring Top Gun into this so much, but like when you look at the movies and you just see the original, even, where is it that same thing depending on if you're at sea or if you're not at sea? Like, are you able to go to a funeral of your buddy and some of them are married and you're literally consoling this 23-year-old girl that's his wife? Like, is that reality?
Well, it depends on
if you're on a cruise.
You're on a cruise, like for us on a cruise, that happened, and the very next day we had a memorial service, and so that's immediate. But the body gets escorted to where the family is at, and there's a whole cemetery memorial and stuff, and you're not there. The one guy, like we all had designated, hey, who's gonna carry my body home if I die? There is a designator. There's a designator, so that person will leave the ship. In this case, it was one of his squadron mates. Actually, it wasn't. It was one of his squadron mates, but that squadron mate had already rolled out of the squadron. So he came back, he met the body, and escorted it back home. Now he attended the funeral side cemetery service. We were still deployed, so we didn't get to break and go there. But now I've been shore based, where we had a mishap, and we're there at the cemetery with the families, going through the whole burial service. And that one was a little bit, that was a shore-based squadron. I was in Key West at the time, and so that was tough, because you've some of those guys had flown 2 tours together, you know, and I was pretty new, but those guys had known each other for a decade, you know. And it was one of those mishaps where you always go, oh, that could have been avoided, you know.
I mean, that's aviation, right?
You know what I'm saying? So you live through that, you know.
That's the weird part of aviation is when you Monday morning quarterback it, it's real easy to say what you could have done.
And nobody
happen.
says that at the time. Well,
No.
you just, you know, you're just missing your bro. You're not casting blame because
No, not at all.
because it could happen to any one of us. You know, it's just one of those things. But it's tragic, you know. And you just try to, and then from there you try to do it better the next time. But you remember those. Those don't go away. They don't. You press on because that's what they'd want you to do. But they stay with you. You know, you don't forget those. I had a really good squadron mate who was a Blue Angel, and that was probably mishap number 8. He's a close friend to a lot of us because he had been in several squadrons when this mishap happened. You know, just one of those days where, you know, they ended up CFIT into the ground, and it took 2 of them. He was the team, and he had a new team member that was coming on the next season, and it was just a split second thing, and it was over. You know,
During a training.
En route to an air show, when they go to an air show, they
Practice.
scout out, they do some certain things, and that's all they were doing, like they do every time. And it was just, you know, they just ended up flying into the ground.
So when you're in the fleet and this happens, you lose a buddy to a mishap and you see airplanes coming down. That's it. You have a memorial the next day. Life literally goes on. Doesn't stop one bit. Mission, Navy, continue. There's no break. Just
Not if
you compartmentalize it.
yeah, you compartmentalize. If you're on a cruise or you're involved in, you know, some kind of deal operation, the Navy goes on, and if you're part of that, you continue on with that operation. That's just how the Navy's done it. You know,
You're in your 20s. That's brutal, man.
it's real. I mean, it puts it in real. You know, the Navy can operate without you. So we always say that a lot of those rules are written in blood.
Yeah.
And when you experience something like that, you're reminded of how all those procedures, you know, came about over the years. You know, and you respect them for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's aviation. That's not just the military, unfortunately.
Have you ever had to eject?
No, I have not. I've been fortunate.
Buddies have. Had
A
buddies
few,
eject?
yeah, and have survived and continue to fly, and yeah, absolutely.
So, advice for future Navy pilots. I know that's a very, very broad.
Oh, I mean,
That's a broad ask, but you look back and you compile your entire career, everything you know about it. Is there okay? Here's the one nugget I'm going to give you. Here's the advice to somebody going into the Navy pilot.
just enjoy every minute of it. Soak it up. It's special,
Love it.
you know.
So, all right, this little segment here. You were a Top Gun student first, and you get the patch, as they call it, right? And then you go back to your squadron, and the terminology is strike fighter tactics instructor, right? So you're an instructor to your fleet, to your squadron. When you get back to the boat, how's that work?
So Top Gun went through a couple iterations. When I was a junior officer, they had a program called Power Projection, and you would go to Power Projection at a certain time in your first fleet squadron, and you had to have a cruise. You had to have a certain amount of experience, and you also had to have a certain amount of time left in the squadron. So, there's only a few guys that just happen to have that timing. So part of it, is just being fortunate at the right place, the right time. I want to make sure I say that. So if you're one of those guys and you get to go, it was between me and another guy, and he went to test pilot school. So, it's not like he missed out. He went a different career route because that's what he wanted to do. You go, and then it's at the time, it was about 3 months. And then you come back to the squadron and you take on a role of an instructor in the squadron. You're typically like the air-to-air weapons training officer. and then you just share everything that all the latest and greatest that you learned at
Okay.
Top Gun. And then the Navy transitioned. What they wanted to do is they wanted people to go through Top Gun. They would get a different designator, and then they created different billets in the squadron. So they went from power projection to strike fighter tactics instructor. And the first year that they had this program, if you were a power projection guy, you went to the SFTI transition course. So it was a really good deal because SFTI was typically like 6 months, and it had, X number of flights and X number of classroom days. And during the transition course, you had all the flights. They just, they took away some of the classroom days. So it was just again, just right place, right time was a great deal. And what the Navy decided is, when you got done with your SFTI tour, there were places that they assigned SFTIs. So they had Top Gun, which was, now at Fallon. They had, each coast had a weapons school, which was just this pod of subject matter experts, now SFTIs. And they would basically administer check rides. If they were at Cecil at the time or Virginia Beach now, they would fly with the East Coast squadrons. And if they were out in Lemoore, they'd fly with the West Coast squadrons. And then each coast had the F-18 training squadron that we call the RAG, and then transitioned to FRS. And each FRS had one SFTI at the time. So I was in 106, and I went through the transition to SFTI to be at 106's SFTI. So it was a really great deal because I lived in Cecil, so I didn't have to move. I got to go out there, come back, and then I also got to do the LSO thing there. So it was 106 was an amazing tour because you got to fly a lot. We had 40 or 50 jets. Everybody that's from a student learning the jet the first time to guide leadership people coming back from disassociated tours, coming back, doing a short course in the jet. It was just awesome. And so, and that's how the Air Force and the Marine Corps is structured. Kind of, they don't use the same terminology. They don't use the term SFTI, but it's the same thing. They use WTO or WTI. They have different names. They might be different now, but the Navy was a little bit later to the game, having a designated tactician that went through some extra training in the squadron. And then when you went back to sea, in the Navy squadron, you have XO, skipper, and then you have 4 department heads, which is typically ops, maintenance, safety, and admin. Now you had an SFTI who was like a super JO, right? And then you had all your junior officers. So now every tactical squadron has an SFTI who went to Top Gun, maybe for the first time, got his SFTI designator, and now he's got a bona fide billet in a tactical squadron responsible for, all the
So it
tactics.
sounds to me, in layman terms, like not everybody can go to Top Gun. You get selected, you go to Top Gun, and then you use those skills that you learned to bring back, and everybody gets a taste or a little bit of training per se, because all that is really good for every Navy pilot.
Absolutely.
But it's just everybody can't go. So
Yeah, I mean,
you're
there's
going to get a
limited
taste,
billets.
and you're going to get trained from a mini Top Gun instructor in the fleet, or however you want to.
Yeah.
however you want to put it.
Your squadron SFTI
I got
is
you.
your contact to Top Gun, and there's certain things that you can't just do in open air. That we have skiffs and stuff, and they're your guys to go in a skiff and learn about new tactics and new things that the Navy's developing. So it's a great program.
When you head off to Top Gun school, how long is it?
When I went through power projection, it was 12 weeks.
Okay.
SFTI, if you were already a power projection guy, when they first stood it up, was about 12 weeks.
Okay.
And now, if you're going from scratch, from what I understand, it's 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? That's a
Yeah.
long time.
So you literally, and now, from what I'm told, you leave your first squadron, you try to select for this billet, SFTI. They send you now to Fallon for 6 months, and then you get assigned a duty after that. You're either going to stay at Top Gun, you're going to go to one of these weapon schools, you're going to go to one of the RAGs. I even think now some of the aggressor squadrons have SFTIs. So there's bona fide positions that they send you to the school and send you to these positions.
So you're not necessarily after 6 months going back to the fleet anymore. You're going to a job.
Usually if you're coming from the fleet, you're going to a shore tour.
Oh, that's
know-
what makes sense to
Yeah.
me. I gotcha.
And so, and then from that, so that's how the Navy does it. Generally speaking, there are guys that go sea to sea, if that's how the cookies crumble for you. But generally speaking, you go shore, you go sea, shore, you rotate back and forth.
Gotcha. Keep some sanity coming back to
I mean,
shore.
yeah, that's the
For the most
idea,
part.
but it doesn't always work out that way.
What did you find the hardest part of getting through Top Gun training was?
I mean, it was
Is it 6 days a week? Number one, 7, 5?
It's mostly 5 or 6 days. I remember being, you're out there to get the course done. I think we had, I think we flew in my class. We flew like Saturday mornings, but we didn't fly we had a bona fide day and a half off, and you definitely needed it. Sometimes your family would come out. You didn't really have a lot of time there because even on that day and a half off, you need to study. You feel like you're always, preparing for the next flight because you're definitely learning from a fire hose, no matter how prepared you are getting there.
So that was some tough training.
It was great training. I mean, you're definitely flying with the best guys. The instructors there were amazing, so, you're definitely not coming in there as a top dog.
What's the hardest?
You're coming in as an apprentice and
Right,
learning.
Sure. What's the hardest part about the training?
I think for me, it was just accepting the fact that, you're going to learn. You're just not going to win every dogfight. It's just so, and those guys were great out there at going through that exercise with you and then breaking down the flight and showing you where you made mistakes, So it's good.
Is it humbling?
It can be humbling for sure, Yeah, I mean, those guys, they're doing that 3 times a day. Out there, those guys have a class. They have they're typically a subject matter expert. If you're out of Top Gun and you're the AIM-9 guy, you're the AIM-9 guy for the Navy.
Oh, wow.
And you're talking to, if Raytheon makes that missile, you're talking to those engineers. It's a big responsibility. So they're at the tip of the spear from an information standpoint, and they're flying their tail off. It's a great assignment, but my friends that have been out there, it's a very demanding assignment.
Wow.
Compared to, being at 106 where I was at was a real fun assignment, because it was just, I thought I had a much better deal.
How old were you when you went?
And I was 24 the first time and 26 the second time.
So you're still just such a young punk at that point, right? I mean,
But so are the guys out there. I mean, what I'm saying? We're all.
You're all 20s, and so they're not crusty 35, 36-year-old
Some of them are
instructors?
the senior leadership there.
Okay.
But the bulk of the instructors are typically lieutenants. There's a few lieutenant commanders. Of course, the XO and skipper are commanders, and they've been in the Navy a lot longer. So there's definitely some. And then now they're out there. You got admirals that run NSOC and stuff. So you have a lot of leadership out in Fallon that's been in the Navy a long time. But the guys that you're mostly flying with are 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years old.
Ahead of you.
Yeah.
And when you come back to the ship, and of course, I would think you, in your mind, you're like, all right, I just went through this training well ahead of probably where I was before I went, right? I mean,
Well, you better be.
you better be.
Yeah.
That's where to graduate
That's
and
the
get
whole
your
idea.
pass. That's the whole idea. So when you come back to the fleet and you've been gone for 12 weeks, which is not that long, and now you're the new guy that is now the SFTI. Are those young junior officers like, all right, tell me what'd you learn? And you're immediately regurgitating what you just learned over the previous 12 weeks? Because you know it now. I mean, is that how it works?
And it is. I think that's how it always works. But I think the bigger picture is that, especially when we first stood this program up, is coming up with a progression and a syllabus to make guys, combat ready. And so what it helped us develop is a methodology, and a progression to take guys through, where before we didn't have that structure. So really, you're going to come back and you're going to have the knowledge, but you're going to implement the structure, for the whole squadron and be in charge of it.
So prior to that SFTI coming back, who's the SFTI that was there trying to feed you guys? Because then you go and now you're the SFTI. In other words, is there always
there was
someone?
back in the day there wasn't. See, that's when we made the transition when it was power projection. You kind of like one guy went, and then 2 years later the next guy went, and that guy with the first guy that went was about to leave the squadron. You're coming back. You have a little bit turnover. You know what I'm saying? Where he's still the guy that went first, and then you take his position, and somewhere behind you somebody's going to go, and that's how power projection was. When we implemented SFTI, when you came into the squadron, there was a guy that was he's the SFTI.
I gotcha.
He's not going to Top Gun. He's already been. And he might have already had another SFTI spot somewhere else.
So there's an overlap.
Yeah, so you're getting now, you have an SFTI. Like you leave the squadron, you're not an SFTI. You're working under an SFTI. You go and you select for Top Gun. You go become an SFTI Top Gun, then you get assigned to a place. You work as an SFTI for 3 years. Now you're coming back to the fleet. So now you're a seasoned SFTI.
Gotcha.
That's what the Navy had envisioned, and in that progression, they're responsible for the curriculum, changing it, making it better, just like we do at the major airlines today.
Sure.
See, we didn't have that before. It was a little bit less structured before.
Little less overlap, it seemed like.
A little less overlap.
You're just getting more. The fleet guys are getting more because there's always
more.
there's always somebody there. That's cool. Is there in your entire Navy career, was there a guy that stood out as like, that dude's the most badass pilot. He's the best. I don't know why he's so good. He's head and shoulders above everybody else. He's just, he's Maverick, man. He's it. I mean, is it the senior guys? It's the guy that's been in 20 years. So he's so crusty and he's been through it all. I mean,
Well, I think
you think of somebody.
Yeah. I had a couple of really good leaders at the squadron commander level, my XO, AV, my CF. Great guy. So he was a good pilot. You didn't remember him because he was some extraordinary tactician, although he was, but that's not what you remember him for. You know what I'm saying?
You remember him for the personality?
You remember for the leader that he was.
Okay.
For his values and how he was able to honor his values and stay a leader. He really modeled that, how to be a great leader, a great husband, a great man of faith, a great parent.
Just an overall
Yeah,
awesome
and then
dude.
that today, so here I am. He knows, if he's listening to this podcast, he knows exactly who he is. He became a 2-star admiral. He's just a great guy. And so he had a big influence on I was real fortunate because on our cruise, you get some opportunities to go work with different air forces. And so you get to get off the ship. So we sent 6 jets to Israel. And I just, it's like, I get to go to Israel, just luck. And I got to go with him, and we got to go see some holy sites. And I got to spend some time with him. There was only 4 of us from our squadron. And we got to go to the Masada. We just happened to be in the Holy Land. And, he's a real strong Christian guy. But he was a warrior. This guy was the real deal. And I just loved him to death. And he just modeled that. So he really inspired me to that, which really had an influence on me later in life. Now, at the more junior level, at our like gladiatorial level, there's one guy that stood out that was a really good fighter pilot. I still get to work with him today. And he was actually my boss for a while there in my last job. He was remarkable because he was very humble. Mm-hmm. He was a great fighter pilot, but he really knew how to break it down and take himself out of it and make it all about, being the best samurai warrior. And behind closed doors, he was a great samurai warrior. He's a great tactician. He's a great guy, loves his guys. So he really modeled what it is to be a really good fighter pilot in a really good way when everybody's watching and when nobody's watching, and so that was special. So, and it's cool because, I got to work alongside him here. I still get to see him here. So that's
very cool.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I don't want to say what airline, but it's really special and he still does that today in a different context. We fly in a 121 world. And so it's different, but but the spirit's still the same.
That's
Which is
awesome.
really cool. And the kid to get to witness that over a span of, in this case, would be goodness, like 30 plus years. That's pretty. I mean, it's pretty cool to see that constant.
Consistency.
Yeah, that consistency.
Very cool. All right. In the military, you have SEALs, you have Delta Force, you have Green Beret. In the military aviation world, you've got the Top Gun guys, you've got the Navy guys, you have the Air Force. What do they go to? Some school called Red Flag.
Yeah.
You know, you talk to a SEAL, they're going to say they're the best. You talk to a Delta Force, everyone's going to have a thought.
Oh yeah.
Why would you say that Navy's better than Air Force?
I mean, the Air Force is great. You know, they have a specific mission. I thrived better in the Navy environment because you get a lot more responsibility. There's just less of us. We just don't have the luxury. You know, like when you got to send a body to a planning cell, it's just an 03 that's going there. We don't have a lieutenant colonel, a spare lieutenant colonel just to go. You know, it's just not there. So you find yourself in these joint environments where you're the lower ranking individual with the same responsibility.
I gotcha.
And so you don't really think much of it when you're younger, but when you look at the overall culture and you ask yourself, why is it different? It just has to be because you have fewer people. So you're put in these positions where you have a lot more responsibility and a little bit less, you know, supervision. We always say, like in the Navy, people always use the example, you know, we've got, this is, you know, in the Air Force, you got, this is the 10,000 pages. This is everything you can do. You know what I'm saying? And the Navy, it's like, here's a little 3 pages of stuff you can't do. But you still got to get the mission ready, mission done. And it's not like you can't get yourself in trouble. You can, you just have to use better judgment. And so you just operate in that mindset. And it's a very freeing environment. You know, it comes across as less rigid, but it's very concise. It's just, you're just doing it with fewer resources. And it's a different mission too. You know, for us, we have to be a jack of all trades. We don't get to have a squadron that's a primary dock of this and a primary dock of that. And when that happens, we'll just move them, you know, from Kansas we don't, you know, it's like, it's the USS Saratoga or the USS Ronald Reagan's there. And we got, you know, 36 F-18s. What are we doing? Air to ground, air to air. You're going to do it all, you know, because you don't have a choice.
I gotcha.
But you get to do it in collaboration, you know, with the other services, which is really cool too.
That's a great answer.
And those guys are great. So I don't want to position us better. People always ask the difference in philosophy, and you see it. You see it when you operate with the, you know, guys from different services. Everybody brings their, you know,
Their DNA, per se.
their DNA to the table, their lens, and then we do great work, all of us together. So I don't want to disparage.
So there's some
brothers.
competitiveness.
There is,
but you're going to be fair about it.
Oh, absolutely. And we got to work together. Those guys, we couldn't do it without them, and you know they couldn't do it without us. So
Right.
yeah.
All right, let's talk about physical demands of being in fighter aviation. Is it true that night carrier landings are the most stressful part of being a naval aviator?
I think in general, people would say yes. I think we're real fortunate flying a nice airplane where we have a nice avionics suite. So, you know, when you fly a more modern airplane, you know, like I'm sure the guys flying F-35s now, you know, you just have better situational awareness. And so all that adds to your comfort level. So just every little element of situational awareness takes away a little bit of stress, you know, and puts you one step ahead of the airplane.
I've heard these stories of Vietnam Air F4 guys, you know, other airplanes as well. They literally go in to drop bombs, go into enemy territory. They're having everything shot at them. And it's more stressful to come back to the ship at night than to go through that. Is that true?
I mean, I'd say being a guy that that's landed on a ship at night and that now lands on 2 or 3 mile long runways, I'd have to say that, landing on a ship at night is more stressful than coming back, to a fixed field, especially if that field's not under fire or something like that, And so those guys back then, Tomcats, A4s, A6s, F4s, I mean, those guys, their instrumentation was much more rudimentary.
If you launch from your carrier and the weather's bad and you're going out on a mission, are you thinking about the ship before you actually leave that mission?
I don't think so.
No?
No, I don't think so.
You're compartmentalizing it until
you're going to compartmentalize the mission. And then when you come back, today's day and age, and you're going to hit a tanker, you're going to go back and your fuel state's going to drive the options that you have. You
Right.
get to a certain fuel state where it's like, you got to go back to the tanker,
Was there ever a time in your career where a guy ejected because of a series of events? He just could not get aboard. Tanker mechanically fails, can't get to shore. There's no options here.
We never experienced that in the
Okay.
air wings that I was in. It has happened in the Navy. We operate primarily the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Mediterranean. So we're not, there were bases around.
I gotcha.
If you're out and there's not, the Navy calls that blue water ops.
Yep.
And they do that. That's a whole different animal. And we didn't do, in the time I was in, we did very little blue water ops.
Okay.
We were in some theater doing something, with a bunch of other people, is typically like it has been from, 1990 to the present. So I never experienced that. But there's guys that have, run out of gas and you literally eject alongside the ship.
No kidding.
And the helicopter comes and gets you. Yeah.
Is that that's not a guaranteed you're out of the Navy or you're not going to fly anymore type thing when that happens, is it? Or does it just depend on the investigation?
I never had anybody, my peers, that
Never had to do that.
experienced that. So I don't have anything to judge that off of.
Gotcha. All right. So my brother-in-law was a avionics guy back in the early 80s on a carrier. He, of course, would have to do like deck ops, as well. And talking about the danger of naval aviation outside of the flying aspect of it necessarily. But one of the arresting cables failed and just took a guy's legs completely off. I mean, did you ever see any carrier operation, terrible things that happened while you were in like that? Or what's the worst thing that you've ever seen?
The flight deck's crazy. When you're in your jet, you can see it's mayhem. But I think you get a real appreciation for it when you're walking out to your jet, especially if there's flight ops going on. There's an art to that, and even more so at night. So these guys that work the flight deck on a regular basis with jet engines, I mean, I've seen people get sucked into an intake, run into a prop. And yes, we've had people, that when that wire breaks, it'll cut anything in half, much less a human body. So it's a vicious environment. And those kids that are out there, they're 18 or 19, and when you see a guy that's wearing a yellow shirt on a Navy flight deck, he didn't just get that yellow shirt overnight. I mean, it's a process to have the privilege and the duty of directing.
And what is the yellow shirt?
He's the guy there's a series of them on the deck. They move all the airplanes from post-landing to getting ready to catapult to parking.
So he's not going to be a junior dude.
He's not, but he's not old. I mean, he's 19, 20, 21.
But he's already shown himself to be
seasoned,
extremely sharp.
Yeah.
So you've seen all that type of nonsense happen on the carrier deck? All those accidents, all those things.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I didn't mean, some of them we just saw the video.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're not out there watching it every time. But I mean, unfortunately, it does happen. Now, the person that got sucked into the intake actually lived and came out, and he had a little hearing loss for a while. But, he survived. Yeah. He survived. His headgear, got caught. They shut the engine down fast enough, and he didn't go in the engine.
What airplane was that?
That was an A6.
Holy frick.
Yeah, crazy. Just when I see the image, it still gives me the EBGBs when I think about
Bet
it
it
today.
does.
You know,
That's nuts.
yeah.
Gosh.
When I see, we do pre-flights on our airplanes, and I think on the side of the jet you and I fly, there's there's like the danger zone, that shows the dangerous part of the front of the engine in the back. And when I see that, when I'm doing a pre-flight, which I try to do every once in a while, that's the image that comes in.
It goes back to the danger.
It just goes back 30 years. Like, oh my gosh,
If you only knew what danger really was.
oh my gosh, So and I think on our jet, it's like 14 or 20 feet. I forget what it is.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's crazy. The aviation will leave memories.
So pulling G's in a fighter. Everybody's seen it on TV. Not a lot of people have done it in a fighter jet. Everyone I know, and I haven't even asked you this question, but every single fighter guy I know has a back issue, has a neck issue, has some sort of an issue. And not all these guys are all built the same. But it seems like if it's not when they're young, it comes up when they're older, right? Because of that sustained G load that you got in your 20s. Do you have anything, neck, back? Because you're kind of built like a little bull.
Yeah, I don't have any that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean they won't come later on down the road.
Because there's a lot of guys that
There
have
is,
that.
and I know they're being sincere. I've always been a swimmer, so that I don't know if that's helped me, and not a good swimmer, just a recreational.
But a swimmer.
Yeah, that's just something I do as cardio. But I don't know, and I've always been like short, stocky, so they always say if you're built short and stocky, you could be a little bit more resilient to pulling G's, because they always say it's from the distance from basically your brain to your heart, and the further that is, the more susceptible you are. But I don't know, it's not that far from me, so it's working.
I love it. So you haven't had any close calls in your fighter jet that you would say that was close? Mid-airs? Coming aboard a ship? Mechanical issues?
Where your air-to-air stuff, you get pretty close, sometimes a little closer than you want, but and usually that's when you get startled. It's like when you see the guy a little bit later than you wish you would have. But I just been fortunate, but yeah, anybody who's done any air-to-air is going to tell you, we've come pretty close.
Yeah.
So I guess if I had somebody flying in my back seat, they might have said something different. Oh yeah, we were close a bunch of times,
Yeah.
We did it a lot. Like I did that a lot, in a instructor environment. But so I was fortunate. I never got hit by another airplane, so I'll count that up to luck.
There you go. What do you think the biggest mistake as an instructor pilot flying F-18s that pilots make air-wise? We see this in the airline industry, what we can probably count on our finger. Well, they'll probably have issues with this and this and this, and it's pretty consistent. It's just the learning curve that people go through. What are fighter guys? What issues do they have when you're an instructor in an F-18? What's the consistent? They're probably going to mess that up. I've got to get them over the hump in that particular thing.
I think, we don't do very many, in 106, there weren't very many backseat flights. We had a few two-seat airplanes, and there were a few flights in the syllabus, like early on, the first couple of basic fighter maneuver flights in the F-18 at the time. You always had like one or two, you had an instructor in your backseat. And I think when you're teaching somebody and you've never flown with them, you're in their back seat, and you don't want to be overbearing. Mm-hmm. I think because I don't like that when people are overbearing with me. I want to put them in an environment where they can learn it, but I also try to create that gap, so I don't have to do that. So always talk about, and I didn't do this early on as an instructor, and then I got scared a few times where I thought the kid was gonna, hit. I think that's the time. Is I had a kid that was bore sighting an airplane, and he came really close, and I realized when we got back in the debrief, he had absolutely no idea. And what I learned from that, because I remember looking at the eyes of the instructor in the other airplane, because it was one of the few flights he was in the back seat, and he came right over the top of him. I remember from that point on making sure we understood that you always have an out, right? So, for example, if you put your lift vector on somebody, right, constant bearing, decreasing range, and nothing's changing, that's not what you want. So you want to make sure that you have an out, so that when you need to make an adjustment, you can make that adjustment. You don't compromise yourself where collision's the last. And so I never took that for granted. I always made sure we understood vertical lateral separation, and that you're always going to keep that there, even though you got to close in for the shot. So I think once I understood that, the student understood that, and I saw him moving the controls in that manner, then I would give him more freedom. But I didn't learn that as a new instructor. We didn't really fly a lot in the back seat, so most of the time your student's in his airplane, you're going out, and
Talking in his ear as opposed to
and you're
being-
watching him.
I gotcha.
But you're not in his back seat. But it was good. And those two flights really, what I learned as an early instructor is that's really what you want to bake in to a new student, is just make sure you know where your out is so that you can survive this.
So you overshot the guy.
Well, what he did is actually, when it was what we call an offensive set. He was starting off in an offensive position, and the other airplane was in a defensive position, the instructor, who had an instructor in his back seat. And so he basically bore sighted the guy. And when he turned into him, he just kept going at him and didn't really realize where that separation was going to come from. And I think his scan broke down, and a lot of things were happening really fast, because that's pretty new to those guys. So we always say, hey, we need to know, how are we going to, and if, to a seasoned fighter pilot, that's a no-brainer. But you have to remember, just because you're seasoned, you're teaching a brand new guy, and you want to get him seasoned. Well, he's not going to get very seasoned if he has a midair. So, yeah. So, but it's an eye opener. You take things you take things for granted, and in aviation, it's really interesting. Like, in our airline industry, we don't take comms, very seriously. People are sloppy on the radio. And when you work in a standards environment, you work really hard to standardize things. We're going to say things a certain way, and part of all that standardization, as much as it gets critiqued, is what you're basically doing is, because not very many industries do what we do. We've never met a guy, right? And we're going to get in a jet with him, and we're going to fly, 15 hours somewhere, and we're going to do a bunch of different things. And we have all these expectations, and 99.9% of the time, everybody says it the same way, does it the same way. So we have like this shared mental model of how things are going to go down, and then when they don't, then our little spidey senses go up, But early on, when you don't have that, there's a wide range of things that can go down. And if you're new, you don't know something's abnormal until it's abnormal.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of baking that ahead of time, building that into the guy's sight picture so that we never get there.
That's awesome. That's crazy. All right. Dogfights are what we see on the movies is they last a couple minutes. I mean, is that if you're in an air-to-air, I'm not talking missile stuff from distances, but you engage somebody. How long is this fight going on before someone's done? Before you've gotten them? Before the fight's done? And the addition to that is, how physically demanding is it? To give us an example of, it's like wrestling. It's like sprinting. It's like doing, whatever. What's it feel like?
Oh, it's exhilarating. It's exciting. It's a lot of fun. You don't really, I don't know, when you're in your 20s, you don't really feel the physical demands because you're focused on, trying to maintain an offensive position and, kind of win the dogfight. it lasts. Sometimes it could last as long as you have gas, you know. And then when you get to a certain fuel state, you gotta live to fight another day. So gas can be the limitation, depending on when the fight starts.
So the fight starts when you're pretty full. How long is?
It usually doesn't. I mean, you're going to take off. You're going to fly somewhere. In a real environment, you know, you're in a strike fighter. You're typically going to drop bombs somewhere. You know, so in a training environment, it can start right away. And typically in a training environment, you're going to do several sets. So you're going to knock it off at a specific spot. You know, most of the time you'll go out with one airplane and do a dogfight and simulate, but you know, oftentimes they don't last like super, super long. You go out there planning to do like 2 or 3. If you have a little extra gas, you do one more. So they don't last very, very, very long. You know, usually you'll knock it off as soon as the training objective is met and start it over again, you know, and to get all those learning points in. Like once somebody gets into an offensive position, you knock it off.
Oh, really?
Now, in a real life scenario, you're gonna if you're in that position and you're fortunate enough to be in that position, then you're gonna finish it by you know taking the other airplane out.
So when you describe it as an offensive position, if you're going to merge and then you're going to start fighting, as soon as somebody's on your tail to the point where I've got you,
you're gonna knock it off.
You're going to knock it off. So is that 2-3 minutes, 4, 5?
I mean,
and we're talking 2 good pilots, it's going to last longer.
5 minutes is a long time.
So that's a long time.
That's a long time because you're in full afterburner most of the time.
And then do you, at that point, is your heart rate at 160, 170? Is it like you then realize, dang, that was tough. I just sprinted for 5 minutes.
You know, no, I mean, you know, no, I never remember that.
Yeah.
When you come back from a flight, you know, I was mostly in Florida, right? So we're down in the Key West. When you come back from a flight, you know, you're drenched.
You're exhausted.
You sweat. I sweat a lot, so you're like just a mess. You have to clean yourself up, you know, before you go to debrief, so you don't sting people out in the debrief. So your body, you definitely get dehydrated. But in the moment, I mean, the flight's maybe an hour. You know, when you're doing these flights, you're not huffing and puffing.
So
you like that night, you'll be tired if you flew a couple times. You're like, whoo, you know, and then you went and worked out. You'll be worn out, but in the moment, you're fully energized, and you don't just come down. You know what I'm saying? Because you got to join back up. You got to come into the break, you know. And if you're in a place like Key West or Cecil Field, you know, you get the luxury of coming in a little faster than normal. You know, so you're having fun the whole time, and it's not until you put the jet away, shut the engines down, that the flight's over. So you're on the whole time.
So in that 3 or 4 minute time span, you're going from a dry flight suit to wet.
I'd say in my case, I didn't really realize it until I came out of the airplane and took my gear off.
Okay.
You know,
but the point is you started off dry and then you must have been huffing and puffing pretty hard.
Well, you're working on your body's going through but you're not registering that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
mentally, you're not saying, oh gosh, I'm tired. You know, that's not processing. That's later when you get out of the airplane.
That's so
there's
cool.
too much. There's just, at least my experiences, there's too much adrenaline flowing for you to come to that,
process that.
To come to that realization. That's, you know, and like the flight's an hour. You know, you can do anything in an hour.
That's interesting. That's super interesting.
And you know, like, I know it sounds like a lot, but you know, 8 Gs is not horrible. You know, now if you're an F-16 and you're pulling 9 or coming to 10, and that's sustained for a while, it'll hurt after a while. But you know, when you're snatching on 8 Gs, and then you know you're just in the moment. You're not, at least me, because I was like a short and stubby guy. I didn't feel it. You know what I'm saying?
That's pretty wild.
I don't know. I loved it. So
okay. Is the testosterone level when you get to the Top Gun school like it is in the movies?
I mean, there's no lack of confidence, but
is it different than the fleet?
I thought it was very professional. When I was there. I really did. most of the instructors that I got to interact with were very intent on teaching. They're very confident in their ability, so there was no compensating for most of those guys. They were really good pilots, and most of them at the time had been there quite a while. There's only like one or two new guys, and we didn't fly with the brand new guys. You know, we were flying with some of the more seasoned guys in those flights early on.
Is it, would you say, have a competitive atmosphere about it more so than when you're in the fleet? Like, is there, are you leveled up at all?
I mean, the expectations, you know, you're definitely in a setting where you can definitely perform at the highest level. You know, you're flying with all the guys that got selected. Everybody's really experienced. The instructors are great. Sometimes you're paired up with an instructor. So, you know, you're definitely in a graduate setting. You know what I'm saying? So I'd say the expectations are much higher, and everybody's working super hard to just get everything they can out of every flight.
So when you watch a Top Gun and you see how those pilots are competitive against each other, trash talking and so forth, so on, is it that way?
No,
No, not at all.
that wasn't my experience. But it makes for a good movie, I guess. You know?
Yeah, oh yeah, of course, it's Hollywood. Would you say that the training is any more dangerous during those 12 weeks than it would be when you go back to the fleet and you train? Because they're trying to push you more, or is it just they're really more of a tactical?
I think
teaching?
you're working harder, probably, but I think if anything, it's safer. The level of experience out there is, they're just doing it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, so they're very experienced, and I didn't feel like it was any more dangerous. I felt like it was probably safer when I was out there.
So when this is post, you went in 91?
I went in 89.
You went in 89. That's 3 years after Top Gun came out. And Top Gun 1, the original, was an absolute game changer from a cinematic point of view and opening up what Navy carrier ops were like. Like, we didn't have YouTube. We had old movies. It was a game changer, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, absolutely. You and I are the same age. So when you go in and you're 20 years old, flying fighters, 21 years old, and it's post Top Gun, when people found out you were a naval aviator and you flew off carriers, was it like finding out about Navy SEALs? Because the Navy SEAL thing wasn't big until later. Like, you maybe knew a Navy SEAL and a family member, and you knew how special they were, let's say. But it wasn't until the access to the internet that people really understood about Navy SEALs. And then there are the big wigs, right? When people found out you're a fighter pilot in the Navy landing on carriers, was it like movie star?
Well, I think they did a great job in the movie. I mean, you know, no hit on the Air Force, but you know, Iron Eagle, Cessna.
That's disgusting. I'm
so
sorry.
I mean, you know, sorry guys,
my Air Force buddies, but
it's coming. You guys are going to get a good movie soon. Don't just hang in there. But the Navy's sexy, you know, like the shipboard stuff, San Diego. I mean, it's got a lot more nostalgia to it. But I think the world in America had a frame of reference. You know, Hollywood put some lipstick on it, but I mean, you know, now you kind of knew aircraft carrier, F-14. You know, by the time I got to the Navy, I was flying F-18s, but it was the same concept, just a different airplane, single pilot. But so it was very easy for people to frame you up and go, "This is what you do," and then you'd have to distill some of the myths of the movie, but still, you weren't starting from scratch.
Were you asked by the civilian population, did you go to Top Gun? Are you a Top Gun guy? I mean, is that how it works?
They would ask, but I mean, you know, like, it's the whole context of it. And, you know, when you really learn about it and when you go, it's, you know, there's only a couple of guys in the squadron that are really eligible, you know? So yeah, I mean, everybody wants to go, you know, and it is a privilege to go, but it's, you know, You take it with a lot more humility, I
So
guess.
are people buying you dinners and
Not
you know
really.
when you're on shore duty and their favorite movie ever was Top Gun, and now, hey, this is Alex. His call sign's Lovey, by the way, everybody. Let me buy you dinner.
I mean, sometimes guys do that just out of respect for the service. I don't know if I garnered any extra, favors on what I did, but I don't know. To me, like I told you earlier, it was such a privilege to do, and I'd like to just downplay it, it's because it really was a privilege to get to do all that and serve with those guys. So I mean, honestly, I was just lucky to be there,
So you're 56.
There's a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have been there.
Right.
So
You're 56 now, and you were 20-ish. Did you have an ego more back then?
it definitely built your confidence. I mean, you had positive reinforcement, so you had to manage that. And, sometimes your buddies would manage it for you, which is good.
So there's times where you might puff out a little bit, and
Not intentionally.
no fights ever.
Nah, not amongst us. I mean, you just, like I said,
What do you mean? Let me stop. What? Not amongst us, but what about
No.
amongst other people?
no, I don't, I don't remember. I don't remember.
You don't recollect, Senator?
No, I don't recollect fights and stuff like that. I just recollect having a good time with my friends, and maybe sometimes getting carried away, but it had nothing to do with, whether you got to attend Top Gun or not. You were just around your good friends having a good time. Celebrate the fact that we get to do this, it's awesome.
When you're in port and you meet other people from other countries, maybe they're pilots too, you're working with them, is there any rub there? Is it all respect? Is it competitive?
No, it's all respect. It's all respect. When you pull in a port, it depends where you're pulling in. Like when we would pull in to Trieste in the northern Italy, at one time we had a squadron that liked to snow ski. So when we pulled into port, we always had an admin. We always had a place. We rented an apartment. We called it the admin, and that was kind of where you checked in to make sure you're okay. You're hanging out with a buddy and stuff. And when you're on the ship, you're on the ship. So you're in the admin ship. So that was kind of like your squadron check-in spot. We had food there and stuff like that. That's where you could sleep. So a lot of times we were pretty adventurous. So our admin was up in like Cortina, actually where they're doing
the Olympics.
where they're doing the Olympics now. And we'd stay up there and go skiing up there. So
Wow.
so you're so far removed. I mean, do you stand out? Maybe, but we're just snow skiing, having a good time.
That's great.
Taking advantage of, being in the Alps, or I guess the Dolomites there in the winter. So it was kind of fun.
When you look back, you're at 20,000 hours of flight time, and you were at 500-600 hours, 700 hours of flight time, then flying fighters. Do you look back and say, "Oh my gosh, if I could just go back now and redo what I did then"? I mean, it's a young man's sport for sure, right? But when you look back and you think, I was flying fighters at 21 years old, 22 years old, if I just had the wisdom that I have now, oh my goodness. Is it, you don't even think about that or?
No, I mean, it's just so fortunate to get to do it. And I just have no regrets. It was just awesome. And I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, honestly, it really, I really feel super blessed the way just things worked out, that, sometimes you just can't make that stuff up if you tried, you know what I'm saying? Or if you try to do it again, it wouldn't be the same. It was good. It was, you just do your best and you leave the results up to God, really, at the end of the day. So what I remember is just, being there for my guys and giving it 100%, and you can always do things a little bit better here and there, but then you just carry that into your next flight, your next journey. So it's all just, like I said, it's all just a privilege. And I tell my kids that, and I tell Nick, like, don't forget, I mean, you're starting at an airline at 24.
Yeah.
And it's just when you think like something's not going your way, just snap out of that and just remember how good life is, because I mean, today is great, then was great, and all of it was amazing. And so I don't know what I could have done different,
Are there advantages when you flew, say, against a 40-year-old fighter guy and you're 22, 23 years old? Are there advantages on both sides of the coin, or are there no advantages to the younger guy when it comes to fighter piloting?
I think it comes
Is there
down
a
to
physical advantage at all with the younger guy if he's fighting an older guy, or not?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I just remember everybody being on a pretty equal footing.
Yeah.
Physically. And everybody, I mean, my skipper, at the time was 42, So everybody's we're all close enough to the same age. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And you'd go out there as a 22-year-old and fight your 42-year-old skipper.
Oh, yeah.
Would he beat you every time?
No.
Really?
Yeah, in fact, he would very rarely beat me.
So tell me, why is that though? Give me some insight.
I'm having fun with that.
Yeah.
He's actually also no, but I mean, you got to remember, you're as a JO, you have a lot less responsibility, so you're not carrying a lot of that. But I'm just having fun. He was an amazing aviator. In fact, to his credit, he had a MiG kill. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, there's people that have MiG kills and people that don't. And in the Navy today, there's only a couple guys that do, just by virtue of, the conflicts we've had.
Is there an advantage at all to the physicality of being young versus an older guy? Like,
I would say generally, guys will tell you it's a young man's game. You know what I'm saying? But what's a young man?
like for instance, a guy I used to fly for. He raced motocross, and he said one day when he looked over and he saw the look in the eyes of the guy he was about to race, who was 10 years younger than him, he's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Because there's that, the younger you are as a guy, the more risk you take, the more chances you take. Is that a thing in fighter aviation that gives you a teeny bit of an advantage?
Probably. I mean, I think so. But the difference in physicality racing motocross, which I've done, and flying fighters, you know what I'm saying? I mean, motocross is the most physically demanding sport, period, more than anything else. That's been talked about. So I think that the physicality probably makes more difference there because of the greater demand it has on your body. Now, flying fighters has a demand on your body, but I don't remember it being the same. And when you get done racing motocross, whether you're good or you're not, now if you're good, you're a lot smoother and you're probably putting your body through less wear and tear because you're more coordinated and stuff. You're worn out. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you're doing 2,000 push-ups in a race,
Okay, so family life while you're in the military. You got married while you were in the Navy?
I did.
And did your wife have any idea what she was getting into?
I don't think she did when she first met me.
Okay.
I don't think she knew anything about the military, but we were friends for a good while while we were dating other people. And she lived in basically Orlando and I was stationed in Jack. So she would come up. So she got a feel for the setting real quick. Her uncles were professional athletes. They were superstar football players and FSU and so forth. So she's seen that part of the, camaraderie piece. And so she's got two brothers. So what the whole guy thing was she was a college athlete. So she was well adept to dynamic environments and so forth. She just didn't know much about the Navy, but she learned quickly, and she fit right in. And I think she really loved the Navy life and the camaraderie because the wives had their own, camaraderie going, especially when we were away. They had a wives club and all. And the squadron's tight. So she really enjoyed it. So we going from friendship to dating to marriage was a very, natural progression the way she did it.
Her first deployment was, well, not her first deployment, but her first experience of a deployment when you left.
Yeah.
How long after you guys were married?
Well, we got married right after my first deployment. So we were engaged. In fact, we got engaged in December, a couple of weeks before I left.
Ooh.
I went on deployment.
6 months?
6 months. She came over. There was a spot in the middle of our cruise at about the 4-month mark, 3.5-month mark. So right pretty much at the half, where we pulled into the Balearic Islands.
Okay.
And some of the wives, that was like the trip. Some of the wives were coming over. So she was one of those. And so, we all got together. And usually, like when your wife would come over, you didn't have any collateral duties. You got to basically take leave for 10 days and go spend time with, in this case, my fiance. And so we did that. It was great. It was awesome. And so we spent, we went to the other side of the island from where the ship was, because that's where all the noise was. And it was great as the summer, in Palma, Spain, in Palma de Mallorca. So
wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So the deployment, she kind of understood that as a fiance, and then when it happened for the rest prior to you getting out, she just kind of dealt with it.
Yeah.
Kids during deployment?
No, so then I came back, we got married, then I had some schools in between and all that. And then we got ready for another deployment. And so I went through that whole workups with her. There was a mini deployment, that we did. And then the squadron deployed. And then right at the beginning of that deployment, I rolled to my second squadron. And that's when and that squadron now is shore-based. So she went through a couple deployments, couple workups, which is a normal 3-year cycle.
Yeah.
In the Navy.
So no Wi-Fi back then, right?
Nope.
No FaceTime. It was letters.
It was letters. We still have those letters.
And so would you, not to put you on the spot versus her, but are you like a letter writer a week, a day, when you feel like it? Are you writing letters all the time to communicate?
A lot. That's all you did. There's the only way you could communicate. So you did probably maybe once a week. We wrote, that was kind of the cadence, 1 or 2 letters a week. A couple of pages, it's kind of a lost art. What's interesting is in the back of so we had our XO and skipper they had access to communications, in the skipper, the ship's quarters and so forth. So they could communicate back to their wives. And typically the executive officer's wife was in charge of the wives club. So the way you disseminated information was through the XO skipper to his wife down to the wives. And they were really organized about that. On the back of our ship, we had these 2, they look like payphones. And they were basically, satellite phones. And you could buy a card. And it was $2.50 a minute.
Oh, are you kidding me?
So a $50 card would get you 25 minutes, but you couldn't sit on the phone for 25 minutes. So I would, on a yellow pad, if I was going to call her, I would organize everything I had to say. She had her own thing of stuff she needed to say. And then we basically had free talk. So the conversation would go about 5 minutes. And, 2 minutes would be like, la, 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 going through all your little list of stuff. And then it's like, all right, 2 minutes. How you doing? And then, and you'd hear the ending tone. So when the tone went off, you had like 30 seconds. So way different. Email didn't come about until a couple of years later, so.
That's hysterical. How often did you have access to those phones?
Not very often, because there's a long line for those phones, and everybody's on the phone for 3 to 5 minutes.
That is crazy.
And those phones weren't always operating.
Okay.
It was very fickle, like the if it was comm out, it was comm out. Now, when I went ashore, I could be in Europe and figure out a way to call her. There was different ways back then than there is now. There were no cell phones or anything, so you'd call collect, or you'd buy some kind of calling card, and
are you aware of how they do it today? I mean, do they have FaceTime? Is it?
They have connectivity on the ship.
So it's just whenever.
Well, the ship can turn that on and off depending on,
Right.
where they're at and stuff like that. But you can email, you can
FaceTime,
text.
whatever.
Yeah, you got a lot more connectivity now.
Isn't that amazing? That's just amazing to me.
Yeah. I mean, my wife's married, my daughter is married, to a gentleman in the Navy, and he's on and off grid pretty frequently, but there's times when they communicate, where it's, hey, I'm on grid, and they communicate in various apps.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It is
pretty
cool.
nice to have that difference, man.
Yeah.
That's a game changer right there.
It is.
All right. So when you transitioned to the airlines from the Navy, did you feel well prepared for what you were getting into, or was it a complete shock to the system when you got to the airlines? When those first, you go through NDOC, you start ground school. I think you said you started on the L1011 engineer panel.
Yeah.
Was that a shock to the system as far as, you had already mentioned systems training, but just how different was it than the Navy?
I mean, the Navy I came from was single seat, right? Still doing crew communications with, other elements of your flight, other strike elements. So you're definitely disciplined in comms. But now you're in the cockpit with several other people. So now it's more of a fly by committee concept, and so it's no longer you come up with an idea and you execute, it's you come up with an idea and it's, what do you think? I don't know. What do you think? Then you get a consensus and then you press on. So that was a little new, but one thing I'll say back then is, everybody was mostly military. Mm-hmm. So everybody was like this little mold, coming into the airline industry, where there was, all the different airlines had the same, percentage of military guys coming in. And so we're all kind of known quantities. And the people that were teaching you were mostly military. So everybody knew who you were and how to get you from point A, to point B. And you basically, from the time you came in until you got on the line, got through your training, did your OE, got on the line, and got a lay of the land. Somehow we survived that, that transgression. But to go from flying a single seat fighter to being a flight engineer, that was just a whole different job description. You know what I'm saying? I was like, well, what do flight engineers do? You know what I'm saying? Are we like fixing the motor while we're flying? I mean, you just have no idea. And it was a lot different growing up, because when I grew up in South Florida, some airlines had professional flight engineers. In fact, we merged with some airlines that had PFEs, and they never became pilots. They were flight engineers for their entire career. And then Delta was one of those airlines where the flight engineer was called the second officer. That's where you started. And then you went to first officer, then you went to captain, so I was just learning all those differences. And for us, in our generation, the second officer stuff was pretty short-lived, because after 9/11, we lost all of our three-place airplanes for the most part. Shortly thereafter, anyways, 7.2s and the L10s went out. We just find ourselves with, two-seat cockpits.
Did you find coming to the airlines and flying with these crusty 59-year-old L1011 captains was a shock? Was it fun? Was it shake your head? Because these guys are different than today's airline captains for sure, as a whole, because they were brought up in a different era.
Oh, yeah.
Just like 30 years from now, the airline captains probably will be maybe a little bit different than what they are today. So was that kind of a fun?
It was fun. We had some characters on the L1011. It was fun listening to their heritage and how they were brought up, and I'd say back then, I think today the captains, there's a narrower spectrum in the character category. You know what I'm saying? Like we're much more narrower. But back then it was a little bit wider aperture, and it was great. You had guys from all different walks of life and different opinions on how the cockpit should be managed and stuff like that. And, as a new second officer, you didn't have an opinion. You'd walk in. I remember this one guy's like, I was pretty new and he was getting ready to retire. Like I told you, I think this was the guy that was in the 60s. Like, listen, right big, and because we had to, you know, on the L1011, when you were coming in for approach, you'd have to come up with the approach speeds and all that stuff, and you have to write stuff down. You say, boy, you need to write big and talk loud, you know, with that Southern drawl. And I'm like, everybody at that time had this Southern drawl. You had to be a leader at Delta Airlines. You had to have this Southern charm and Southern drawl. So I still haven't developed it.
I love it. I love it. That's great. So you've been a instructor in the Navy. Did you ever do any sim instructing?
I never did. I did some in the Navy. You know, we had some of that.
Okay. So you did some of that. You did some standards work so that you're looking over the current and qualified guys in the standard world, or the new guys as well. Where do you see that guys struggle the most overall? Like if you were to put everything into a silo or a category, and you combine all your training roles together, this is just a overall, this is the umbrella of a pilot. Where do they struggle the most? Where would you say they struggle?
I think like overall, if you cross the spectrum, I think just in overall communications, that's where we could always be better. You know, as captains, as instructors, just, I think, thinking through the background, that's one of the things I really appreciated about the Navy. In our background, you didn't have the luxury to talk a lot. You know, that they always trained you to say more or less. And so in the tactical world, you learned this language, that certain words meant multiple things, and you were graded on how, as a flight lead, you spoke on the radio, particularly when it came to tactics. And, that's one of the things, out of Top Gun and the strike fighter world, you didn't have the luxury to be on some common frequency where you're just talking at random, because you had your flight, you might have 30, 40, 50 airplanes on that frequency. So calm discipline was huge. And I feel like when people communicate, if they're able to say something in fewer words, I find that to be more effective, to leave more space for silence and listening. I think in our industry, when you watch people give presentations, when you listen to them talk, I'm talking about like the airline, I think people talk way too much. If you had to say, because I think if you really sit down and listen to when you're teaching a new standards guy, there's a lot of things you could do in a lot fewer words and make the learning experience a lot more enjoyable. Right. Some of the worst OEs is when you're on, we always say it's like some Aurelian monologue where the guy's just talking and talking. It's just kind of like a kindergartner. Think, well, the kindergartner, you got about 15 minutes, and the pilot, you got about 30 to 45. So what are you going to cram in there? We're going to talk about the pre-flight for 45 minutes, so by the time we get to important decision-making stuff, the guy's asleep, So I think we talk too much.
What's funny about that is I can't help but think about like business in general, families, raising kids. Communication in this world is key. And
100%.
The application of it in everything that we do is unreal. And we're stuck on aviation here, but it's funny that that's what you pick, because I would agree, whether it's a briefing item, whether it's a teaching thing that you're doing, you're exactly right. Communication it's everything, and it's an art.
No, it definitely is. I don't think we take it. We really spend enough time on it. Like in business, just take aviation out of it. There's always this old adage, the money doesn't go to the best investor. The money goes to the best communicator. Period. And every time there's a breakdown, it more often than not, because we can communicate a multitude of different ways, to include all the different social medias and stuff like that. I think with breakdowns always in communication, in my opinion.
No, I agree. All right. I gave you those 15 questions of kind of the rapid fire, and I want to dig just a little bit into this, and then we're going to close. You said the hardest airplane, what made the hardest airplane so challenging? And that was that L-1011, I think you described as the systems. And was it because it was such a different world that you were in from what you knew, and it was the pinnacle of your career towards the end of your naval career, and now you're starting this brand new thing? And we kind of touched on back in the day when we got hired, our systems training was much more complex than it was or is today. Is that why probably, did you have to build the L-1011 as a flight engineer panel-wise?
I mean, probably not as much as the 7.2 guys, but I think in the airline industry, we're only doing systems, right? In the military world, especially if you're in a tactical role, you got a multitude, especially if you're flying, a single seat strike fighter, you know what I'm saying? You got a multitude of weapons you can deploy. So systems is a part of it, but you're the art of air warfare and strike warfare. That brings a whole new element of complexity. So, you can choose. You can go into systems and just, so I think I like the idea that we don't have to build it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We don't have to build the airplane today, but there was a lot of senseless stuff that we weren't really learning the airplane. We were just memorizing a bunch of facts.
Yeah.
And then today we would argue, that we go through systems a lot faster and we don't really learn the system. But the systems today, if you put in the time, and you really go through, once you get through training, once you get through OE, and you break down an emergency and you look through the procedures, you can see the correlation to the systems and understand them if you take the time to do that. And I think that's where we expect the learning to take place today. But that's a big change, when guys used to come in for 4 weeks of ground school, and they were being paid to learn the airplane. And so, a lot of guys feel like they have a bigger burden of responsibility and they're not technically being paid to learn the airplane. But I think I'm not saying that they're wrong. I just think that the systems have changed. In my opinion, they become a little bit easier to digest, and maybe it's because we've been doing the same systems for the same time. But I think now you need to correlate them operationally and really, learn your jet in the context that you're flying it. So it's just a different perspective that we have in the 121 world. And it's driven by safety, but it's got the overlay of compliance and regulations. And most of the time they correlate. Sometimes there's some unnecessary redundancy and inefficiencies. We discover them and work through them. But I think it's just a different mindset. In one mindset, you're a warfighter. You're starting with the target. You're reversing out, right? Weaponeering the target, going backwards. And systems is a part of that. It's not the only part.
Yeah. Would you agree over the last 25, 30 years of you being in the airline industry that, our time span or the time span that pilots spend in training prior to getting to the airplane on OE is roughly 4 weeks? That's what it was for you and I 30 years ago. But
it's 4 weeks, but I think I'm trying to correlate the time that we learn systems, because now we're given some LMS modules to complete, and I'm trying to correlate that to time. There's a certain amount of hours.
What's interesting about the past is many people started as an engineer, and you weren't a flying pilot. You were in the airplane, but you're along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have your Jepson plates and you would see what's going on, but you weren't in the hot seat per se. And so you really had to fill those 4 weeks with something. That's what it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now to do that amount of system training and then to go be a pilot as well, which I think our job has gotten much more difficult with the systems, the management of the systems on the airplane, with the autopilot systems, the flight management systems, the airspace that we live in, the SIDS, the stars. That is much more complex than what we started off with, where you just fly a heading till you pick up that VOR and then you go VOR to VOR to VOR, descend and maintain, climb and maintain, and now it's climb via, descend via. The changes are much more rapid, much more advanced changes. It's way more technical than it used to be, and we are managing it through our flight management system, so our autopilot will do what it is. And so that 4-week period, we could not fit all of the flying duties that we have to learn and all the systems that we used to learn into that window. It would be impossible. And it seems like that's why the systems has changed, because this is operational, if that makes sense. You know?
Yeah, the system would definitely change, and we basically learn it before we come and maybe spend a day or two and take an ESV. That's a lot different. You could argue, is that more efficient, less efficient? I don't know. But we're also shoving a lot more airplanes, into the airports. There's a lot more traffic. The density is a lot higher. And as a company, we're flying to much more parts of the world, so we're all over. So we have to depend on a lot of these complex systems to make that happen. I think that's I mean, somehow it all works out, but I don't really know how you really make it better. Are you advocating that you go back to?
I don't think there's a good answer.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a good answer. In many ways, it feels like the pendulum swung a little bit too far in systems reduction, because it is more kind of, as you described, more of a self-study as opposed to a classroom environment where you can raise your hand. And, I would like to see the pendulum move back towards the center a little bit. Maybe in that you could ask a systems expert in class about something. I don't need to learn temperatures and pressures anymore and draw out the electrical system for me, but more of a, teacher student, aspect to systems. But I also think that we're coming into the AI world where we will probably, the future person, your son being young, will probably have some goggles that he'll put on, and he'll be in class and he'll be able to ask questions, and there will be a AI feedback. Hey, Siri, hey, Grok, whatever it happens to be, explain this to me, because you can't get that now. You don't get that now. And I think that's where I would hope that it would go to, is to there. So you can conduct as much class and learn a system with some interaction, as opposed to kind of, what's that mean? I'm not getting that. Where'd I find that? It's findable immediately. That's what I hope it becomes, because I do feel for our era, we learned so much in the beginning that we still carry that knowledge of deep system knowledge into every airplane, because it does carry over.
I think where you bridge the gap, and where I think training in the historical training was void of context. You talk about some of these concepts, but you couldn't fit them in to where you're going to really use them. So you're more in an academic setting, and you go reconcile that operationally by the time you get through your check ride and go to your OE. But there is systems now, in my last job, we go to some of these shows, and there are virtual reality systems, something as simple as learning flow patterns. Now, they're a little more rudimentary 2 years ago, and they're developing, but the idea is you're going to have a set of goggles on. You can go through a flow, and your hand has got some kind of glove, and it's actually touching the switches, so you don't have to have all the built-out sim. You could do this, like you said, in your living room, or you could be walking around the jet doing a pre-flight, or maybe going into the future doing some of these short learning simulations, just going through a star, the beginning part of an approach, and just putting all that stuff together. So when you get in the sim, you've almost seen it all, and now you're touching the real,
I think that would be really neat training.
Oh, I think so.
Emergency, you tell your goggles, hey, I want an engine failure, and then you go through your procedures, and I'll be long gone at that point. But I
think like we both flew Boeing and Airbuses, and when you get in an Airbus and you come from the Boeing, you're flying it mentally. Your frame of reference is the Boeing, so you're looking for buttons that do the same thing. Manage descent, VNAV, you know, all that kind of stuff. Open descent, flight level change. You're trying to make all these correlations. But in you know, like the big change in an Airbus is it goes through these different flight phases, and it's going to do a certain thing at a certain time. And it's only after you've got some time where you're like, you reconcile all that and you know why it's not going into descent mode. You know what I'm saying? But those are all material things and learning that if you don't have context early on, you're not going to ask the question.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's that's where I think some of this technology will help you ask the questions that you would otherwise ask later on in your path. You know what I'm saying? Which I think is, which I'm 100% agreeing with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Alex, Lovely, Howell, it's been awesome, man. It's been awesome. This has been a great interview. I appreciate your time.
This is great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. This is great.
This process of taking you from your civilian world into your military world, get people a taste of naval aviation, of Top Gun, for guys that are going to transition to the airlines, talking a little bit about that. I appreciate your time. So thanks for joining me, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, pleasure's been all mine.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.